The preceding program was brought to you by the faithful supporters of No Limits and Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland. For more information and free sermon notes, visit our website at delmancoats.org.
Matthew chapter 20, beginning at verse 29, the word of the Lord reads as follows. It says, "As they were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed Jesus. And there were two blind men sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was passing by, they shouted, 'Lord, have mercy on us, Son of David.' But the crowd sternly ordered them to be quiet, but they shouted even more loudly, 'Have mercy on us, Lord, Son of David.' Then Jesus stood still and called them, saying, 'What do you want me to do for you?' And they said, 'Lord, let our eyes be opened.' And moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes, and immediately they regained their sight and followed him." Amen. Verse 34 again, "Moved with compassion, Jesus touched their eyes, and immediately they regained their ability to see something. And then they followed the Lord." I want to preach today, church, from the thought, I can see clearly now. Is that all right? Do me a favor. Help me to announce my title to your neighbor. Look at your neighbor and say, "Neighbor, oh neighbor, I can see clearly now." Look at the one on the other side and say, "Neighbor, when I look back over my life, I can see clearly now." Come on, put your hands together and give the Lord praise today. I can see clearly now. Last year, something happened in my life that I had not anticipated, and it literally caught me off guard. Last year, I began to notice around the middle of the year that every time I went to a restaurant, I had difficulty reading the menu. I didn't know what it was, but more and more, I began to notice that every time I went out to eat, I had to hold up the menu to the light, pull out my cell phone and use the flashlight. And on a few occasions, I would have to ask someone for assistance to do something that I had been able to do for myself my entire life. And for a while, a long time, I thought the reason I was having so much difficulty is because the restaurants started dimming their lights more to make it more intimate, a more intimate ambiance. Or I even thought that some marketing guru somewhere had universally decided to make the print smaller on menus. But one day, while pulling out my cell phone to read the menu, I looked around and noticed that I was the only one in the restaurant reading the menu with a cell phone. Out of all of the people in there, of all ages and backgrounds, young and old, I was the only one in there struggling to see. And it was then and there that I realized that there was a problem with my eyes. Something must have been going on. And so I made an appointment with an eye doctor for an examination and an evaluation. I discovered when I did that my ability to see things up close was not as good as my ability to see things far away. And as a result, the doctor said that I would need reading glasses. Nothing wrong. She said it's a normal thing that happens with my age. She said that I would need glasses, and I got them. And I'll never forget, church, the feeling I felt the first time I put on those glasses and began to read words on a page for the first time. I remember saying to myself, "Oh, wow, I can see clearly now." And from that moment on, church, my blurred vision cleared up. Things I could not see before all of a sudden came into clear view. And I have been able to see things that I could not see before in a way and with a level of depth and clarity that beforehand I could not, because the lenses in my glasses helped me to see what I could not see before. And I then realized, church, that declaration that I can see clearly now applied not just to reading words on a page, but also for navigating our way throughout life. For as it is in the natural, so it is in the supernatural. For it is hard trying to function in life when you cannot see. It is difficulty navigating your way in life and through life when you don't have a clear understanding of who you are, what you are doing, or where you are going. You are trying to walk around with blurred vision. But when you get clarity, when God gives you revelation about your situation, you are able to move peacefully throughout life knowing that you can see a whole lot better now. Have you ever looked back at your life and said, I can see a whole lot better now? At various junctures throughout life and throughout the Word of God, the Bible underscores the importance of having clear vision and a proper perspective on life. Proverbs 29:18 says that where there is no vision, the people perish. Vision is so important to the prophet Habakkuk that Habakkuk said that when God gives you a vision, you ought to write it down and make it plain so that those who read it can run with it. Proper vision is what inspires us to embrace life and spurs us into action, to do something great, knowing that no matter what you go through in life, that in the end, we're going to win. Tell your neighbor, in the end, we're going to win. That only comes when you have a proper vision. Having a vision enables you to wake up every morning with a sense of purpose, with a sense of calling, with a sense of destiny. It'll keep you moving forward when your trials try to push you backward. When you got vision, it helps you to move forward, knowing that the Lord has so much more in store for you. For a person with a vision is a person with a future. Les Brown said, if you have no vision of yourself in the future, then you have nothing to live for. And yet, there are many people around us who are unproductive, stagnant, and stalled in life because they have lost their vision. Their goals have been blurred. Their plans have become distorted, aborted, and put on pause. And it seems as if they just don't know what to do. But the key to breaking out of that cycle is to develop 2020 vision this year. And to do that this year, you got to get an understanding that your past, your path, and your prospective future are preparing you for a life lived more abundantly. And right here in our text today, Jesus and his disciples are on their way to Jerusalem for Passover. The Bible says that as they pass through the city of Jericho, they come across two blind men sitting by the roadside. And seeing blind men by the road was not an uncommon sight in antiquity, for it was oftentimes the place, the roadside, where the sick and those living on the margins of society were brought or made their way to beg for assistance from those passing by. That day, their lives changed. That day, their lives changed after they have an encounter with Jesus Christ, and it literally turned their lives around. As a matter of fact, as the pericope starts, they are in darkness. They are blind and cannot see. But by the time the pericope ends, before we turn to the very next chapter, they are in the light. They can see, and now they are saved following the Savior. They went from having no idea where they were and what was going on around them to being able to move forward with a sense of confidence and boldness and assurance. And I believe that if they were delivering the message today, if they were able to consult, to share with us today, they would tell us that they went from being beside the road, stuck and stagnant without Jesus, to on the road with him because they reached a point where they could see their lives clearly. Now, anybody here today ever gone through something, and when you look back over it, you said to yourself, oh, I see things a whole lot. I see my finances clear better. I see my relationship. Come on, y'all, here today. I see my finances better. Well, this word is for anyone seeking to resolve a state of blindness in your life, spiritual blindness, where you are trying to understand what God is saying in this season. Professional blindness, where you are struggling to figure out whether God wants you to stay on that job or pursue another job. Financial blindness, where you are struggling to figure out how you are going to make ends meet. Even emotional blindness, where you have questions about your life and it has caused you to lose your hope and your faith, and some are on the verge of giving up and throwing in the towel. Well, if you have or ever had a cloud of darkness over your life and you are unable to see your way through, there is counsel from the Lord in this text. And the first thing this text teaches us is that when you find yourself stuck in life, you first of all have got to realize that what you lost pales in comparison to what you have left. That's what it should say. That what you lost pales in comparison to what you have left. What stands out to me about this text is that the main protagonists, these two blind men, have a lot against them. Not only does their physical disability prevent them from seeing the world around them, it also prevents them from being equal participants in society, socially, politically, economically, and spiritually. There are no policies and resources available to them that make it possible for them to be full participants in society. There's no Palestinians with Disabilities Act at the time that allows those with disabilities to have full access to public accommodations. There are no schools or guide dogs for the blind. There's no braille that enable blind people to read and function. In the ancient world, blind people are considered an unredeemable, untrainable, and an undesirable class of people. And they are beside the roadside because blind people were denied full integration into society. They had to stay in the back. They got a ride in the back of the bus. They are the last hired and the first fired. Their schools don't receive adequate funding. Their neighborhoods don't receive sufficient investment because they were blind. They also could not be employed. And if you can't find a job, you can't take care of yourself, your family, and be a full participant in society. And to make matters worse, they are not only marginalized by society, they are also shunned by religious folk. According to the rules of the temple at the time, people and animal sacrifices perceived to have defects on them were not allowed in the Lord's house, and certainly not in the Holy of Holies, in the presence of God. In order to come in God's house, in order to get in the temple, you had to have it all together. You could not have a blemish. You could not have a stain. You had to be perfect, which is why Matthew's version of the story that he inherits from Mark and now written to a religious audience has these blind men who don't even have names. It was a way of religious people of reducing a person's humanity and dignity to the sum total of their issues, in which they define people by their disability. And we do the same thing today. We define people by our perception of their problems and their issues in life. The men have no names like blind Bartimaeus does in Mark's account, and as a result they are effectively nobodies. You know something, it's one thing for society to shun you, but it's another thing for those who claim to represent God to cast you aside as well. But the blind men do not let the fact that they cannot hear prevent them from moving forward in life. I'm working on something. Their eyes don't work, but clearly their ears and their mouths do. For while while they cannot see Jesus, they seem to be able to hear him, and they can call out to him, which suggests that they don't let their limitations limit them. Life will teach you one valuable lesson, church, that a limitation in one area does not cancel another potential in another area. There are so many people who are caught up looking at what they don't have that they fail to utilize what they do have. Don't let your deficiency over here keep you from utilizing the gift that God gave you over there. They could not see, but they could hear and they could shout. And by using what they had, they got the attention of Jesus. And that's when a breakthrough will come into our lives. When we take time to tap into the power of what we have rather than focusing on what we don't have. Mark does not tell us how these blind men became blind, but however it happened, the text suggests that what they lost paled in comparison to what they had left. And I want to pause right here and proclaim to somebody listening to me right now that what you lost pales in comparison to what you have left. What you lost last year pales in comparison to what you're about to gain this year. That your positives are going to outweigh your negatives. That your blessings are going to outweigh your burdens. So stop overestimating what you don't have and who was not there and what you lack, because God says that your negatives don't have the kind of power that you think they have. Have I got a witness in my house today? Your negatives cannot nullify all of the things that are going right in your life. Don't ever let one thing going wrong prevent you from tapping into the three things that are going right, because your limitations don't have to limit you. Can I prove it? I say, can I prove it? Oprah Winfrey got fired from her first job, but she went on to be a billionaire. Barack Obama lost his first campaign, but he went on to be president of the United States. Martin Luther King got locked up in jail, but he went on to win the Nobel Prize. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates didn't finish college, but they went on to be two of the richest men in the world. Tyler Perry was homeless at one time, but last year he ended up building the largest production studio in the country. God says what you don't have cannot nullify what you have left. And I want to know, are there about 27 of you who can just thank God that what you lost last year is pales in comparison to what you got left this year? I want to tell you, your negatives won't cancel out your dream. Look back over your life and you will discover, oh, I can see clearly now. I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth, but I thank God that I'm still here. We come from a long line of people who did not have what everybody else had, but somehow they knew how to take the leftovers and make a lot out of a little bit. But secondly, these blind men show us that your breakthrough comes when you decide that you want something deeper in life. Now, what stands out to me about this text as it unfolds is what the two blind men ask for when Jesus comes passing by. First of all, they ask for mercy. Can the church say mercy? And then they ask for their eyesight. And I find that quite interesting, because beggars who are positioned by the roadside are just supposed to ask for charity. Y'all not here? Beggars are just supposed to stay in their place, hold their hand out and ask for money. That's it. I mean, that's what you're to do if you are a beggar. But on this day, they discovered that they wanted something different. And in order to get something different, they had to do something different. They wanted something deeper from the Lord. It is a foolish person that keeps doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome. And it was that decision that caused Jesus to stop. Is it possible that you have been feeling as if the Lord has not stopped by your situation because you haven't approached him with a request for something deeper? Y'all not here. Some of us are stuck because our prayers are too superficial for God. You praying for money, you praying for a bigger house, you want a boo, a bae, you want a bigger crib, you want more cash, more cars, more clothes, more cosmetics. We got so many people coming to church looking for stuff. But when you see clearly, you realize that there is something deeper that is more substantive than stuff. And Jesus stops because he liked the fact that they had reached a point where they realized that it was time for them to get something deeper. If you're feeling as if you haven't gotten the Lord to stop by your situation, perhaps it's because you haven't gotten serious about wanting something deeper. Had they asked for a handout, like I'm sure they had done time and time again, they would have found themselves back in the same block, back on the same spot a few days later doing the same thing all over again. But they reached a point where they said to themselves, today is going to be the day. They reached a point where they said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they realized that now is the time for a change. I want to declare to somebody here today that God is saying that you got to realize to yourself that today it might be the day for you to change. Is there anybody here today going to say, now is the time? Now is the time for me to get my health together. Now is the time for me to get my walk with God on a better foundation. Somebody say, now is the time. Everyone around them was asking for money, but they asked for mercy. And life will become clear to you when you realize that there's something deeper that you really need in life. And that became clear for these two blind men when they reached a point, first of all, where they were no longer afraid to ask for help. Think about it. I don't believe they were the only blind men who wanted something better for their lives. I'm sure there were other blind sisters and brothers sitting by that roadside, but they were afraid to acknowledge to themselves. And they were afraid to admit publicly that there was something wrong in their lives. And so rather than dealing with it and confronting the problem, they kept it to themselves. And they just blended in because it's better to just go along and look like everything is going well when it's not. They were in denial. I remember when my eyes first started bothering me Valentine last year. Sometimes I would sit there in a restaurant and I thought I could just shake it off. And I would be looking at the menu, shaking, trying to hold the menu at different angles, thinking that, well, maybe if I just open my eyes wider, that it would change. But the wider I opened my eyes, the blurrier the words became. And I realized I was in denial. How many times have you been riding in a car with someone and you're trying to go somewhere and it is abundantly clear to you that you are lost, but they are so determined to figure it out themselves that they do not want to ask for. Y'all know those people. So many men die prematurely because they don't want to admit that they've got a health problem and that they need to go see a doctor. That day I had to admit that my vision was diminishing. It didn't mean that I, as a human being, was diminishing, but I had to admit that I needed some help. And I like these two blind men because they are not afraid to open up their mouths and to admit that if something is not going right here. They realized that their condition was such that they were not able to handle it all by themselves, and that the only way they were going to get better was to open up their mouths and ask for help. I'm preaching to somebody here today who, because of your ego and the degrees on your wall, it is preventing you from being transparent about what you are going through. Listen, church, you cannot heal what you are trying to hide. Somebody ought to tweet that. Look at your neighbor, say, neighbor, you can't heal. Come on, tell your neighbor, you can't heal what you're trying to hide. Whatever you're struggling with, you got to deal with it. You got to confront it. You got to admit it to yourself, to God, and sometimes you got to admit it to somebody else. Don't be afraid to say, Lord, I can't see. I'm struggling with depression. Lord, I don't have all of the answers. I don't know how my family is going to make it financially. The worst thing in life is having to front around people and act like you got it all together when you don't have it all together. There is nothing worse than having to come to church and fake and front like a relationship is great and it's not. To have to perpetrate around people like you're problem free when you have issues. The cemetery is full of people right now who could still be here, but they just did not have the courage to ask for help. But the Lord sent me here today to tell somebody, you're not going to get a breakthrough from your depression, from your anxiety, until you reach a point where you confronted yourself and ask for help. If you and I are going to see clear this year, you got to be honest with your issues. But not only were they not afraid to admit their issue, the text suggests that they were also willing to step out of their comfort zone. Tell your neighbor, step out of your comfort zone. When I read this text, I see two groups of people that these two blind men were willing to confront. On the one hand, there were other blind people, people in their own community, people in their own social and economic condition, people in their own neighborhood who just like them were in the same, remember there are other blind people who are by that roadside, and yet those people are so conditioned by a life of blindness. They are so conditioned by a life circumscribed by the roadside that they are content just asking for change, and they don't even want any better. Y'all not here today. Sometimes you got to break free from people who have been down so long that down is starting to look down on them and they don't want any better. But on the other hand, there is a crowd of onlookers that the text says that when they start shouting, told them to keep quiet, to shut up and be satisfied, begging for public aid. The crowd was comfortable giving these men daily assistance, but they became unsettled by the men's attempt to break free from the social confines. And in my sanctified imagination, I can hear both of these group of people trying to give them advice. You know how they are. Well, if I were you, I would just be comfortable in my circumscribed location and be satisfied with the resources that we give you. But you got to know that every now and then, that when people say if they were you, the reality is they are not you. Tell your neighbor, you ain't me, you ain't me. And then there are crowds around them who are saying, y'all ought to just be satisfied. Y'all blind people want too much. Y'all blind people want too much promotion. Y'all want too much equity and fairness. But I like these brothers because rather than succumb to the pressures of the crowd and rather than succumb to those in their community, they decided that they wouldn't let the stares and the opinions in opposition of others prevent them from crying out to Jesus. And at a certain point, you got to reach a point where you say to yourself, self, I'm not letting anybody keep me from getting what God has for me. I thank God that I've reached a point in my life where I realize that the stares and the opinions and the opposition of negative, dysfunctional, and narcissistic people are not worth my time or my energy. Some of you cannot move forward because you listen too much to the negative of people who ain't trying to go nowhere themselves. Why are you listening to people tell you about your relationship and they ain't even in them? Oh, y'all not here today. Tell your neighbor you got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to get out of your comfort zone. God has more in store for you. They got to realize that what they lost pales in comparison to what they have left. And they got to realize that you got to reach a point where you want something deeper. Have I got a witness here? But thirdly, these blind men show us that in order to reach a point where you see clearly now, you got to discover that oftentimes what you think you want in life is not what you really need. Y'all here today? Tell your neighbor, say, neighbor, what you want is not always what you need. See, now readers of this passage are unable to see something that I saw when I read the Greek New Testament. Because we read the text in the English, there is a point that I think is pregnant with possibilities for exegetical purposes. It's right there in the text. When you read it in the Greek, you will discover, get this, that the eyes they wanted opened in verse 33 are not the same eyes that Jesus opened in verse 34. Y'all hold on with me. I'm going to preach. I got to teach it first. It's two different words in the text. The word ophthalmoi, from which we get the word ophthalmologist, is used in verse 33. But the word omatone is used in verse 34. Tell your neighbor, two different words. Ophthalmoi, used in verse 33, refers to one's physical eyes. But the word in verse 34 refers to one's spiritual eyes or one's insight. Y'all still with me? So here's what I discovered exegetically, and I just got a revelation on this text this morning. They asked for their physical eyes to be opened. Are y'all here? That was an improvement. They wanted something better. They wanted more than charity. But Jesus gave them something that was even better than what they asked for. When you read it in English, you don't see it. But it is easy to assume that Jesus gives the two blind men exactly what they want. But when you read the passage in the Greek, you'll discover that Jesus gives them not something physical. Jesus gives them something spiritual. Have I got a witness here? And it helps us to understand, church, that what you think you want is not always what you need. Isn't it good to know, church, that we serve a God who is able to give us what we want? Yes. He's able to open any door. Yes. He's able to answer any prayer. Yes. He's able to lift any burden, heal any hurt, and make any way. But life will teach you that everything you think you want, everything you put on your Christmas list, everything you get down on your knees and pray to God for, everything you think you want, child of God, you don't really need. How many times have you wanted something and then after you got it, you realized that it wasn't what you needed all along, that the money was temporary and not lasting, that the relationship was short term, and that the job brought you more problems than it brought you joy? I've even had experiences wherein I got something I wanted, and then after I got it, Lord, cleanse my mind, I didn't want it anymore. The friends were more fake than faithful. The promotion took more out of me than it added to me. And here it is, I had what I wanted, but then I realized it's not what I really needed. Have I got a witness here? I've discovered that there are a whole lot of people in church living with people they wanted, driving in cars they wanted, rearing children they wanted, going to jobs they wanted, living in houses they wanted, stuck in relationships they wanted, and now they have what they wanted and realize it's not what they needed all along. Have I got a witness here? Oh, it's good to know that he's able. But the good news is that even though God is able to give us what we want, he's got veto power. And if we're faithful, he reserves the right to give us what we need. Glory to God. And not only will he give us what we need, he'll give us something better. Have I got a witness here? See, if God does something for you, it's going to be better than what you wanted for yourself. That's what Paul had in mind in Ephesians 3:20, that God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that you could ever ask or think. And the good news is that even though the blind men didn't get what they wanted, they got something better. And God wanted me to tell somebody here today, when you get in your car today and when you go home today, don't you despair. You can thank God that he's up in heaven. He's preparing a blessing for you that's better than anything you could have ever asked for yourself. Oh, I know. This is the educated crowd. And I know what you're wondering. You're wondering, what is the insight that they received? If they asked for their sight, but they regained their insight, what is the insight that Jesus gave them? I just got this about 2 hours ago this morning. I've been preaching this text for years, and God gave me revelation on this text, and God showed me what the insight is that Jesus gave them. Are y'all listening here? Every commentary, every exegetical resource says that Jesus gave them their sight back, their physical eyes. But when I read it in the Greek, I said, oh no, there's no reason to assume that he opened their physical eyes. As a matter of fact, I don't believe that they got their physical sight back. What they got, what they regained, was insight. And I was like, Lord, what is the understanding and what is the insight that you gave them? Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. And here's what the Lord showed me. The insight that Jesus gave them is that they didn't have to have their eyes opened in order to be a follower of Jesus. Y'all not here? See, according to the religious protocol of the time, you could not be a follower of God if you had issues in your life. If there was a blemish in your life, you could not be a follower of the Lord. So I need you to imagine they're on the road where other followers of Jesus is. They're following the Lord, and they got everything together. But the blind men are on the side of the road because the theological tenets of the time suggested that if you got an issue in your life, that if you got something wrong that other people perceive to be wrong in your life, you cannot be on the road following a Judean teacher. Are y'all here today? And so they're beside the roadside because their eyes don't work. Somebody told them somewhere that if your eyes don't work, you can't come into God's house. So when Jesus recovered their sight and they got insight, they discovered that they didn't have to have it all together to be on the road with Jesus and to be a follower of his. And every now and then you have got to be delivered from people who assume that because of what's going on in your life that you can't be a follower of the Lord, that the very thing that others say disqualifies you from being a Christian, God says, you just bring it to me, honey. You just bring it to me, brother, and get on the road. Have I got a witness? You know what people say? She had a child out of wedlock. He got locked up in jail. He got divorced. His marriage didn't work. How can he preach to people? But Jesus said, I'm going to restore your insight, and I'm going to help you to understand that even though you don't have what other people say you ought to have, you can still get on the road and follow Jesus. Come on, look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, get on the road and follow Jesus. Have I got a witness? Is there anybody here today who can say, I don't have a degree, I'm not a member of this fraternity or that sorority, I didn't go to this house, nobody's house, but I'm still on the road, and I'm going to give God the best praise that I have. Have I got a witness? In verse 29, they're beside the road, but by verse 34, they are on the road. And once you get on the road, you're going to give God the best praise you have. Have I got a witness? Come on, look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, I see clearly now. Neighbor, I see clearly now. I don't have to be rich. I don't have to be educated to be in the church. Have I got a witness? Look at your neighbor. Come on, touch 3 people and tell them, get on the road, get on the road. Some of you need to get out of the pews and say, I'm on the road. I'm tired of being beside the road. I don't care what somebody else says. I see clearly now. Yes, they realized that what others thought disqualified them from being a follower of Jesus because of their background, because of who they were. They regained the capacity to understand that you don't have to have it all together to be a follower of the Lord. Come on, put your hands together. Come on, church, put your hands together and give the Lord praise today.
The preceding program was brought to you by the faithful supporters of No Limits and Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland.